Sir Keir Starmer's first day at the Nato summit as Prime Minister has been dominated not just by the defence of Ukraine, but by questions about his policy back home on British defence spending. He's sticking to his line that Labour's manifesto promise to raise it to 2.5% of economic output is a cast-iron promise, but without a specific time frame. There were promises for Ukraine from NATO as a whole, for F-16 jets from Denmark and the Netherlands, and NATO membership once the war with Russia is over.
It must have felt almost surreal to Keir Starmer just 6 days after the general election. Here he was, touching down in Washington, D.C. A quick breakfast with the German Chancellor,
the Right Honourable Keir Starmer,
before striding into a NATO summit, lining up with world leaders and then taking a seat at the top table. And look who was right beside him. But this event, to mark 75 years of an enduring military alliance, comes at an ominous time for the world.
We obviously signed the original treaty way back. We reaffirmed today, but also to discuss with President Zelensky what further support that he needs, and to reinforce, in a sense as a message to Putin, the resolve of NATO, bigger now than it's ever been, more united than it's ever been, and absolutely clear-eyed about the threat of Russian aggression.
And Russian aggression was on show again today as Vladimir Putin's defence ministry released this footage of strikes just days after a children's hospital was hit in Ukraine. An attack Starmer described as appalling as he showered President Zelensky with warmth and this promise.
Change of government, change of position.
Thanks so much. You are with us from the very beginning of the war.
The Ukrainian president noted Starmer's suggestion to journalists that Ukraine could use Britain's Storm Shadow missiles to strike military targets inside Russia. Meanwhile, other NATO countries began transferring American-made F-16 fighter jets. This is the backdrop in which Starmer is receiving warnings back home that Britain's armed forces have been depleted.
The army is not capable of deploying a war-fighting division and sustaining it for any length of time. In fact, I think we'd be pressed to deploy it in the first place, frankly. And we need to increase, in my view, very firmly to at least 2.5%, probably 3%, if you're really going to make a difference.
Starmer says it is a cast-iron promise that he will spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but it is subject to fiscal rules and so economic growth.
Well, Anushka is at the White House for us, where Sir Keir Starmer is currently meeting President Biden for the very first time. An incredibly important encounter, Anushka. What will they be discussing?
Yeah, they are in the Oval Office. At the beginning of that meeting, journalists were allowed to go in and watch what they were saying. They were talking about the success of this NATO conference. They were also talking about the special relationship. Joe Biden called Keir Starmer and the UK the best of allies. But as you might have guessed, football came up. Journalists shouted out to ask, is football coming home? Keir Starmer said he thought that it was. Joe Biden suggested it was because he was Prime Minister. And actually, Keir Starmer then joked that so far England have not lost under a Labour government. But look, as you were just hearing there, very serious questions right now about defence, about the ominous state of the world, questions about whether Keir Starmer really is going to be able to get to that guarantee of spending 2.5% on national income. And while he's been out here, he's been talking about other domestic issues as well. And one of the things he told us on the plane on the way here that is worrying him the most is the state of overcrowding in prisons back home. He said he was really shocked at what he had found. And in the next few days, we know that the government are going to look at an early release scheme to try to ease that overcrowding. He was saying that this was one of the kind of key things that he needed to look at in government now, and that he was very surprised by what he had seen. That, and alongside it, things like doctor strikes as well.